As the cliche goes, April showers bring May flowers. But usually what comes after is the heat and dryness of summer. Hello again, Essay here. And before the hot weather of the holiday shows up, you should indulge in my new short story, The White Cat, a free exclusive on Substack. The links are down below in description. Join Margot Thompson, a beautiful stage actress and recent widow who finds salvation in the form of a white cat during a night of terror. While checking out my oddball thriller, remember that my Glitch series is still available at Amazon and Barnes & Noble. The links are down below in the description. While you'll find my peculiar story about a white pussy entertaining, that doesn't mean I'm out of ideas. I still have more stories coming down the pike, so as long as I don't run into any mishaps, you'll see those stories as well. Now let's get back to the video. Hello again. Essay here. Contentious elections is not something new to America. Indeed, it has happened repeatedly. And probably the first one that happened was in 1800 when Jefferson ran for president against Aaron Burr. However, it didn't quite work out as planned because the vote count was kind of wobbly. So according to the Constitution, it's supposed to be sorted out in the House of Representatives. Problem is, House of Representatives were going to push Aaron Burr to the top. But then at the last second, Alexander Hamilton, who didn't like Burr particularly, said, nah, I don't want this clown being president. So he managed to convince the rest of the Federalists, who he was the leader of, to go with Jefferson. And let's just say this. You could say Hamilton signed his death warrant at that point because a few short years later, Burr shot him in the head. Now, of course, elections that we had since then haven't been that contentious, though I have to admit the one in the 1860s came pretty damn close, because that was a four-way split, no joke, between Breckinridge, this guy called Bell, Stephen Douglas, who actually debated Lincoln, and then of course Lincoln himself. But the funny thing is, according to the history books, Lincoln's name never appeared on the ballot in the southern states. Only Breckinridge and Bell. And they say, what about Douglas? Well, his name appeared too, but he only won one state, that was Missouri. And then you say, why'd they have a four-way run, four guys running at the same time? Well, it wasn't because they had four parties, that's for sure. No, because the Democratic Party, they had basically split right down the middle. You had the Southern Democrats, they wanted Breckinridge, but the Democrats up in the North, they weren't feeling it, and they said, "No, we want Douglas instead." Why? I don't know. They just didn't think much of Breckinridge. And then, of course, you had, like I said, you had Bell. He was representing another party. I think it was called the Constitutionalists, I believe. And then, of course, finally you had Lincoln. And Lincoln, he was able to get most of the votes that were outside the South, and therefore he became president. And then, of course, the shooting happened, which I'm not going to get into, but I think you already know that history, so I'm not going to go further with that. But of course, we had really contentious elections since then too. In fact, the last one in 2020, yeah. And of course, anyone and that occurs at first, the news media claimed, "Oh, you're hallucinating. Biden won that election fair and square." And then, of course, not even 2 months after Biden was inaugurated, that article appeared in Newsweek magazine about the shadow campaign, and half the country, smelt a rat. Yeah, well, anyway, this video is not so much about contentious elections per se, but contentious people who are involved in elections. Now, I got this video from Mark Dice, and I don't know if you heard about this story, but you're about to hear it now. Okay, are you ready? Here we go.
By now, I'm sure you heard the news that Joe Biden gave us perhaps the greatest October surprise of any election, calling us all garbage. And you got to see Donald Trump's reaction when he first learned the news live at a campaign rally in Pennsylvania. And Joe Biden's statement was so clear that many in the liberal media, including the Associated Press, are not even trying to deny it. This would seem like a meme, but this is the actual headline. Biden suggests Trump supporters are garbage. He made the comments yesterday on a live stream with a Latino organization when he was denouncing the comments that the comedian made at the Madison Square Garden big MAGA extravaganza when he joked about the Biden administration unable to manage Puerto Rico and the landfills are full there because of all of the debris from the recent hurricanes and it's piling up. And so he called it a floating island of garbage. And so this was Joe Biden's response. He got confused. He thought maybe he himself was from Puerto Rico and then managed to say what he really feels about all of us.
Or Puerto Rico, where I'm in my home state of Delaware.
Puerto Rico, where I'm from. I mean, in my home state of Delaware.
They're good, decent, honorable people. The only garbage I see floating out there is his supporters. His demonization is seen as unconscionable, and it's un-American.
You got to see President Trump's reaction in just a moment and the failure to even attempt to spin this from some in the liberal media. But first, subscribe to my channel if you're new here and check back on a regular basis. Here he is at a rally in Pennsylvania. Marco Rubio brings him the news.
Well, I wasn't going to say anything, but I have breaking news for you, Mr. President. You may not have heard this. Just moments ago, Joe Biden stated that our supporters are garbage. Are garbage. He's talking about the Border Patrol. He's talking about nurses. He's talking about teachers. He's talking about everyday Americans who love their country and want to dream big again and support you, Mr. President. And I hope their campaign is about to apologize for what Joe Biden just said. We are not garbage. We are patriots who love America. And thank you for running, Mr. President.
Wait for it. This is fantastic.
Wow.
It is hard to believe. When I first saw the video, I thought maybe it was a deep fake. And so I had to double, triple check the facts just to make sure that it's real. And of course, it is.
So you have, remember Hillary, she said deplorable, and then she said irredeemable, right? But she said deplorable, that didn't work out. Garbage, I think, is worse, right? But he doesn't know, you have to please forgive him. Please forgive him, for he not knoweth what he said.
He doesn't. He's a senile, crazy old man. Some of the clowns on CNN were even saying, well, Joe Biden's not running for president, so it's no big deal. He's not the one on the ballot. Others, however, are just flabbergasted and don't even know how to possibly spin this.
Tonight, there's new reporting about Joe Biden and a moment that explains why things are the way that they are. Sources tell CNN that the president is in do no harm mode, stapling himself to the bench at the direction of the Harris campaign. Well, even from the White House, he may have done some pretty significant harm in the final week of the campaign. Just listen to this, and you be the judge.
And just the other day, a speaker at his rally called Puerto Rico a floating island of garbage.
Because of your mismanagement of the territory, yes.
Well, let me tell you something. I don't know the Puerto Rican that I know, or Puerto Rico, where I'm in my home state of Delaware. They're good, decent, honorable people. The only garbage I see floating out there is his supporters. His demonization of seen as unconscionable, and it's un-American. It's totally contrary to everything we've done, everything we've been.
He didn't correct himself. He just went on and doubled down.
Joining us now, Franklin Leonard. He is in our fifth seat. He's the founder and CEO of The Blacklist. That was a moment, and not a moment that the Harris campaign wanted.
It certainly was. And even Anna Kasparian, the co-host over at The Young Turks, Cenk Uyghur's sidekick, posted, so the president calling tens of millions of Americans garbage is supposed to demonstrate character? Here's Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro in the key swing state where Donald Trump was last night, and not even he can try to downplay or deny what happened.
Governor, first off, just what's your response to that comment from President Biden, where it sounds like he's calling Trump supporters there garbage?
Yeah, look, I had not heard that until now, Caitlin, so I'm kind of giving you my fresh reaction to it. I would never insult the good people of Pennsylvania or any Americans, even if they chose to support a candidate that I didn't support.
He's in complete shock. He can't believe what he just heard. And the fact that it was presented to him by CNN host, this RBF Joker-looking creature, Caitlin Collins, who previously admitted that she has no emotions because she is a sociopath. Can't believe that Joe Biden would actually say such a thing. Joe Biden later took to Twitter. His staff later took to Twitter and posted in the first person claiming, earlier today, I referred to the hateful rhetoric about Puerto Rico spewed by Trump's supporter at his Madison Square Garden rally as garbage, which is the only word I can think of to describe it. His demonization of Latinos is unconscionable. That's all I meant to say. The comments at that rally don't reflect who we are as a nation. Politico, one of the wastes of cyberspace online, published this article written by an MSNBC contributor named Jonathan Lemire, claiming that Biden, in a Zoom call with the organization Vote Latino, said the only garbage was the hatred of Trump supporters who said such things about American citizens. When Hillary Clinton called us all deplorables and irredeemable, that was in early September of 2016. So 2 months basically before the election, an incident so infamous that it has its own Wikipedia page. And in a presidential campaign, 2 months is an eternity. So thankfully, old Joe tanked Kamala's campaign just 7 days before the election this time. Do you have any more good news for us, Mr. Pollster over at ABC?
The 7 states that are almost certainly going to determine the presidency, things close as ever, and we're seeing a very slight Trump edge in several of the battleground states. Kamala Harris's numbers have gone down just a little bit.
What about you, Clown News?
Harris, as I said, had an 18-point advantage with Latinos. Biden in the 2020 exit polls, he had a 24-point advantage over Trump 4 years ago among Latinos in Arizona. Harris is +1 with Latinos in Nevada in our poll, but according to the 2020 exit polls, Biden won them by 26 percentage points. If that actually is what emerges on Election Day, that's a big warning sign in Nevada.
It's a great sign, is what it is. Also last night, Camelface gave a big address to the nation in the Ellipse in Washington, D.C., with the White House in the backdrop, which was dubbed her closing argument to the voters of why morons should vote for her. And during half of the speech, you could hear sirens going off in the background, I think from protesters.
Look, we know who Donald Trump is. He is the person who stood at this very spot nearly 4 years ago and sent an armed mob.
Okay, January 6th, blah, blah, blah. And they're pulling out all the stops in these final days. They rented the Sphere in Las Vegas to put this ridiculous message. Vote for Kamala, vote for freedom, they say. And out of desperation, she continues to do sit-down interviews, which is great because every time she does one, she loses supporters.
What's your message to Michigan voters in terms of the economy? We have auto workers who are being laid off and those who fear that they might be laid off. The average person can't afford groceries or their rent. And recent polls in Michigan show that Michigan voters believe that Donald Trump would do a better job with handling the economy and bringing jobs back. What do you say to that?
Let me guess. I come from a middle-class family. She would never be so ridiculous, would she? Oh, wait, what's this?
Well, let's start with this. I come from the middle class, and I'll never forget where I come from. My mother worked very hard.
She is so desperate that she actually agreed to do a sit-down interview face-to-face with Joe Rogan. But it looks like that's not going to happen because Joe is a prima donna, and the campaign only wanted to do an hour, which would have been fine. Anything more than 10 seconds, and she's going to look like a complete clown. But she said, and that may actually be true, that her schedule is too busy for her to fly into his Austin studio to do it. So they wanted him to come and meet them somewhere on the campaign trail. And instead of doing that, he said he's too busy. Although Joe is such a flip-flopper, maybe he'll change his mind. At this point, anything can happen. Steve Bannon was also just released from prison yesterday after being locked away for 4 months for refusing to comply with a ridiculous subpoena from the Biden Communist Justice Department, demanding answers, trying to entrap him about January 6th.
Okay, you saw that, right? Now, of course, some of you who remember 2016 election remembers old Hillary and her basket of deplorables remark. Yeah. And of course, some of you are saying, oh, well, old Biden is senile. Who cares what he says? Yeah. I agree. He's a senile old coot. Unfortunately, he's also the president of the United States. So it's not like he's just some random old fart on the sidewalk screaming at clouds, okay? Are we clear? And of course, you notice how in Mark Dice's video, the news media, or I should say the left-wing media, tried to clean up what Biden said, but there's no cleaning up what he said. Now, of course, some of you say, well, who cares? I mean, it's not like Biden's running president for a second time. True. But of course, apparently some people were worried that just Biden, who is still the president, saying such a thing would basically allow that stinky fart to go over in Harris's column. And I'm thinking, the fact that Harris hasn't denounced what he said, well, you can take that for one way or the other. But of course, the problem with what Biden said was that he was reacting to a joke. And indeed, multiple commentators have said that that comedian, I don't know who the guy is, he's new to me, he was trying to make a joke which didn't land very well. And he was basically complaining not about the people in Puerto Rico, because you saw in Dice's video, he was complaining about the garbage in Puerto Rico. Apparently the federal government has some jurisdiction over waste disposal in Puerto Rico, and apparently for years they've basically been falling down on the job. And then of course you say, well, can't the people in San Juan handle their garbage problem? Well, apparently not. Apparently it's out of their hands. Apparently it's a federal issue. Why? Maybe because Puerto Rico is technically not a state and therefore doesn't have the same rights as the state. And this clown who happened to be at that shindig that Trump had over at in New York tried to make a joke about it, and it, like I said, it didn't land very well. And ever since then, these radical leftists who call themselves journalists, or as Jennifer DeQuarrie calls them, journalists, which I'm not going to get into, they tried to basically try to spin it into saying that the guy was referring to the people of Puerto Rico, which he wasn't. But like I said, when you try to make jokes about esoteric things, unless everyone in the audience is in on the joke, maybe you shouldn't tell that joke. Just saying. But the fact that Biden would then go and turn around and spout what he said, yeah, you could say that was a low blow, but not surprising considering how the Democrats have been portraying Trump and his homies for 8 solid years. Calling them everything under the sun and a few things that are not in the phone book. Now, of course, as you saw in Dice's video, Trump, he didn't reciprocate. Why? I don't know. Maybe he didn't have a zinger in his back pocket ready to flip out, or maybe he's just a better person. In other words, he's not going to stoop to that level. And I have to admit, that shows the content of Trump's character. Yeah, and of course some of you are saying, oh, but Trump says all kinds of mean stuff on Twitter for years. Yep, I agree. But guess what? When you look at all those mean tweets, it's not directed at groups of people. It's usually directed at individuals, usually people who are in the elites. Remember that joke about Rosie O'Donnell? Yeah, precisely. Now, some of you was try to bring up that statement he made about people being animals, and then old Nancy tried to parlay as him saying it was about Hispanics, which was technically correct, but not quite, because anyone who saw that whole video all those years ago knows that he was actually talking about Hispanic gang members, namely MS-13, but there's also a few others in there, and he was referring to them as animals. And I think anyone who's familiar with those Hispanic gangs will say, yeah, they're kind of beastly, to say the least. But then again, that's always been the problem with Trump and his mouth. No matter what he says, the left-wing media will always spin it to make it, to make black look white, up look down, and in out. In other words, they basically would, try to make any Trump, hyperbolic statement look as bad as possible to make him look bad. But of course, as you saw in that video, it looks like some people in the mainstream media are beginning to get the message that maybe they shouldn't be doing that. And of course, as you saw in that video, Mark Dice's video, he was referring to what's been going on with some of these so-called news publications, namely the Washington Post and even Los Angeles Times. How they formally decided not to endorse a political candidate this time around. Why? Let's just say they have their reasons. But of course, as Mark Dice said in his video, and he's not the only one, other people have said it as well, like Jeremy from the Quartering, that these people have realized that these news publications are gaining nothing by chasing the radical leftist crowd, by basically spoon-feeding them everything they want to hear. Because as Michael Jordan once said long ago, when someone asked him about why don't he cater towards Democrats more when it comes to his Air Jordan sneakers, he replied, Republicans buy sneakers too. And I think that's something that the so-called news media, the mainstream media, forgot for the last 8 years. That Republicans or right-wingers, they buy newspapers too. And the fact that these news organizations for like 8 solid years have basically just threw their lot in with Democrats and liberals and leftists, they end up alienating half the country, and they end up losing all that from that side of the aisle. And now they're realizing, maybe we shouldn't write off half the country. And indeed, Biden's statement basically tells you where a lot of liberals and leftists are. They're basically writing off half the country. Now, of course, anyone who knows anything knows that when you have a Democrat Republic, that's no way to run a railroad. Because anyone who's familiar with the Lebanese Civil War knows that's what you end up with. And of course, some of you who are familiar with the Lebanese Civil War, I don't have to explain it to you, but for those who are ignorant, that's basically what happened there. Initially, they did have a representative republic, but then, unfortunately, the people started arguing primarily along sectarian lines. And then, of course, the arguments basically got hot and then superheated. And then, to borrow a phrase from Ice Cube, those people in Lebanon put down the microphone and picked up the gun. And before you knew it, you had a 15-year civil war in which nobody won except for the Undertaker. Yeah. And of course, the war only ended because the people who lived there, namely the Druze, the Shiites, the Sunnis, and the Phalange Christians, can't forget them, they basically got so exhausted of fighting and killing that they basically said, okay, we had enough, let's stop this. And they did. And so far, they've had more or less a functioning society since. Now, of course, can that happen here? Of course. But won't necessarily be along sectarian lines like in Lebanon. Nah. In fact, old Tim Pool, when he talks about, bad things like that happening here, he said likely would be states against states fighting over resources. And I'm thinking, yeah. In fact, if anything, if something like that happened here in America, it likely resemble the crisis of the 3rd century. And you say, what the hell is that? Well, it's something happened back to the old Roman Empire when they had basically a busted up governmental system in old Rome, and the various Roman provinces, like Gaul, for example, were basically left on their own. And according to the history books, for a brief period, nobody was running the Roman Empire. And therefore, the various Roman republics basically run their own affairs. But eventually, the people in Rome got their act together. Eventually, they managed to find an emperor, which lasted for more than 5 seconds. No joke. And eventually, they were able to bring the empire back together again, despite all the chaos and anarchy that happened in their political system, as well as their economic system. Yeah, they had an economic downturn during the crisis of the 3rd century. Now, of course, regardless of how this election turns out, and believe me, we have no idea how this election is going to turn out, we could have a stable government, or we could, at the very least, have an unstable government. The only question is, will it be unstable like the Lebanese government back in 1974 when their civil war broke out? Or will it get really bad like it happened during Rome during the crisis of the 3rd century? No man knows the future, but you can look at trends. And indeed, I remember a long time ago, a few smart cookies wrote a couple of really excellent books. I can't remember the name of the books at the moment, where they predicted that the United States would face a crisis in the 2020s. And wait for it, you ready? These books were written back in the 20th century. Indeed, if I remember correctly, the books were based on trends that showed that every 70 to 80 years, some crisis hit the United States and the world in general. And indeed, they showed in their hypothesis that if you go from the 2020s backwards about 70 to 80 years, you reach the Second World War. And then if you go leap backward again, another 70 to 80 years, you end up with the American Civil War. And then if you do it again, you end up with the American Revolutionary War. And therefore, these smart cookies wrote this book, said that, yeah, in the 2020s, the United States will likely reach a crisis. What kind of crisis? Well, they kind of hedged their bets. They presumed it'll be either a political crisis, where something happens in D.C. and something happens to the government, or they predict there'll likely be an economic crisis. And of course, anyone who remembers what happened back in 2008, during the crash, or worse, the Great Depression in the 1930s, will say, yeah, that can happen. And of course, anyone who's been paying attention to recent world events, namely the BRICS and the new currency system that those countries are developing for themselves, that would be completely separate from the economic system that's been running world affairs since the end of World War II. We're talking SWIFT, the IMF, the World Bank, and all those other institutions. Yeah. Well, that could definitely cause a real crisis here in America, because according to a few smart people, the United States, we have way too much debt. In fact, more debt than the law allows. And unfortunately, unless we get our house in order, namely that debt, that could cause an economic crash here in America. Especially if various countries outside America stop using our money as the reserve currency of the world. Yeah, true. So yeah, the United States is likely lined up for a serious crisis. Now, of course, some of you are saying, yeah, but everyone who's been paying attention to the last 4 years of the Biden administration, it seems like we're already there. I'll concede that. However, when you look at the history of the world, what's happening right now here in America, it can get a whole lot worse. No joke. Way worse. More unbelievably horrific than you can possibly imagine. We can only hope that the guys who wrote that book are wrong about their predictions. Because personally, I don't think I want to see a replay of the Lebanese Civil War or the crisis of the third century happening in the streets of America. No joke. Well, that's all I gotta say about old Sleepy Joe flapping his lips and saying things he shouldn't be saying, and what might be the long-term consequences. That's my opinion.